Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to AI Colorado's virtual learning session this week. We're glad you could make time to join us. We've got a very interesting, timely, and relevant conversation today about managing through this economic crisis and surviving the year ahead. Just as a reminder, you'll get one learning unit for attending today's session. You'll need to have RSVP'd online via the calendar event for today's session. We've got the link for that in the chat in case you need to do that again. And please stay through the end to ensure you receive that credit for today. As with all of our presentations, we encourage audience participation, and we have a Q&A feature that is at the bottom of your Zoom interface bar there. We'll be monitoring those as the conversation progresses and getting those questions into the conversation. So today we've got something that is on everybody's minds, I'm sure. It's how to navigate these challenging times. To join us and help us sort through that issue is Nick Belitz. Welcome, Nick.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me, Mike.
So Nick, for those who don't know him, and if you've been part of our Business of Architecture series, you've had the chance to hear from Nick before, and we're grateful for his continued partnership with us to share this information. Nick is a principal with Morrissey Goodale, and he specializes in merger and acquisition advisory, as well as ownership transition consulting, valuation, and strategic business planning projects. Nick's expertise lies in financial analysis, deal structure, negotiations, and strategic business analysis. And he's worked within and for the AEC industry since the start of his career. So without further ado, we'll get right to that great information. Welcome, Nick, and take it away.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, appreciate the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining us here in the middle of a very nice sunny day in Denver, Colorado. I hope you all are safe and well where you are. This will be the third or fourth year in a row that I've come to speak to AIA Colorado at this time of year. So thank you very much for having me back, first of all. Part of what I am trying to do here is really get you as architects to step away from design and step away from the things that you went to do architecture for to begin with, and really just focus on the business and focus on how to manage the business and to manage it successfully. So in past years, I've been able to come to this group and talk to them about current trends in the industry, what we're seeing on not only a national level in terms of business strategy and decision making, but also at a global level, and what the very large firms are seeing and what they're doing and how they're thinking. Due to the events of the last several months and the pandemic that we were all facing, there was no way I could give that sort of presentation again. This one is going to be almost entirely on where architecture sits in May of 2020 and how we as an industry and how we as a group of architects and designers can think about not just getting stuff done in 2020, but really surviving 2020 and getting to 2021. So I will need to ask for your indulgence there and some forgiveness because part of this message is going to be very much one of tough love, and one in which I need to tell you, quite frankly, what architects tend not to do. Maybe it's not their fault. Unfortunately, many of you got through school without any serious business classes or finance or economics or accounting classes or anything like that you actually need when you either join a firm or become a project manager or start having client or profit and loss responsibility, or you're a principal of a firm. And it doesn't matter if your firm is 10 people or 20 people, 100 or 1,000 people or more, you need to have a lot more sense about the business of architecture than anything you were ever taught in school. So everything that I'm going to give you here is with that in mind, is what do you do? How do you survive this? We do have a Q&A feature open here. I welcome all questions as we get through this. So please don't hesitate to send those across the line. If we don't get to them in the middle of the presentation, we'll have time at the end where you can sit here and pick my brain, or if anything didn't make sense. So let's get started here. First of all, just real quick about Morrissey Goodale. If you're not familiar with our firm, we are all-purpose management consultants to this industry. All of our clients are architecture firms, engineering firms, environmental consulting firms, or some combination thereof. The firm was actually founded as a strategy consultant where Mr. Morrissey and Goodale had their start. I started here 9 years ago specifically to run the financial advisory practice that we do, which encompasses mergers and acquisitions, ownership transition, deal pricing, etc. But by virtue of that, I get involved heavily in strategy discussions just because it ties into they tie into each other very, very well. If you're growing a firm, you may want to acquire another one, or if you're growing your architecture practice, you may want to sell it to a bigger architecture practice down the line, and that's where we help. As part of all that, we do a lot of research and education on anything that we think will be helpful. Right now, we've actually been putting out weekly updates on the quote word of the street, what's going on in the industry, what we're hearing from other sources, other sectors. I'll be happy to give you a summary of that as we work through. But as you can imagine, things are changing. And then, of course, we do a substantial bit of what we call Workplace 2020, which is executive search and staffing right now. And believe it or not, even in uncertain times like this, there are a lot of people looking for positions and people are changing jobs. So it's good to see. Okay, this is what we're going to be talking today over the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. First of all, where we stand as an industry. This may be somewhat the comedy section of the presentation just because it's changing every day, and the news is rapid fire, and what sectors are doing well can be very, very variable, but we'll give you the best that we've got. Then we're really going to talk about the meat of it, which is business planning. And then I had to write this in, how to save your business, because there are a lot of architecture firms right now that are either putting people, furloughing them, or they had to do layoffs, or they're just not sure where their big projects are coming from. So this is what we need to talk about. And then I'll wrap it up with some key takeaways, and we'll be taking questions through the period and at the end of it as well. So let's get started here really quickly. First of all, and this is data that we've pulled from Dodge Analytics. This is data from the AIA itself. If you as an architecture group are not reading everything that comes out from the AIA, that's okay. You're like most of us. But in times like this, I would suggest you focus on things like the billing index and what they're seeing from their contacts around the industry. Right now, and this data is it's already a little out of date because Dodge Analytics hasn't updated everything through where we are here in May. But we right now we've got 22 million unemployed right now. That number realistically is more like 33 million at the current moment. And certainly we hope that all the shutdowns that are being lifted around the country are coming out of it. But this is something that is very much unprecedented. And I know we're used to hyperbole in the current environment and the media culture that we've got. But the fact of the matter is there are more than 30 million people today that do not have jobs that had jobs 8 to 9 to 10 weeks ago. And that is unprecedented in the history of the country. Now, along that point, there have been a lot of comparisons as to whether or not we're entering into a second Great Depression. I'm here to tell you that this is not the case. What happened with the Great Depression was a structurally flawed economy hit some very bad times. What happened at the beginning of 2020 is that the economy was functionally strong. There wasn't anything really wrong with it that we were doing from a financial crisis basis or from any other perspective that would make you think once we get through the virus, things are going to be very, very slow to restart. That is not what we're seeing. The challenge is that we've never shut down the world's largest economy before and all the design and construction that goes with it. So we don't know what's going to happen, but believe it or not, there is reason for optimism. When we look at all this data, and we look at architecture having low billings, and we look at backlog coming down, there is reason for hope. So I don't want you to take all this as gloom and doom. It's just that this sort of crisis we haven't really seen before. The other point I need to make here is that during the Great Recession of 10 years ago, architects not only took it on the chin, but they took it on the chin, they got punched in the stomach, and then they were kicked while they were down. Architecture went into a very long slump, largely because the recession was so protracted that it got to every sector. And then when the economy did start to warm back up, we had a situation where all the plans that had been shelved for a year, year and a half or more could just be dusted off. You didn't need any new design coming through to get your projects off the ground. Everything that was just put on hold was resurrected. Maybe it got redesigned a little bit, but the result was we had a multi-year decimation of the architecture profession. Of course, we're hoping that doesn't happen this time around, but then again, we've never shut down this huge economy as quickly as we did. So while nobody's really quite sure, what we do know is that billings are down. It shows a contraction. And the firms that do have work now, and they're out there, by the way, we have clients and contacts around the country who report that architects have plenty of work to do. The situation is that we're running through the backlog that we built up at the end of 2019 and the first quarter of 2020. Where we go from here is a bit of an open question. All right, this is a graphical view of what's going on with the billings, and this just emphasizes the historic nature of the drop. This is the horror show part of the program here, mixed in with a few words of hope. But I do need to give this to you just because there's still a lot of work to be done right now. People are busy. They're having virtual meetings. You know, their billability is good. I've got architecture clients that report that utilization was actually up at the end of March and through April because nobody had to sit around and traffic and cut into their day. They weren't having meetings or water cooler chats that cut into their billability. So things were going all right here. What we don't have a line of sight on right now is when proposals are going to be consistently issued and that backlog will be refilled. So this is what we're looking at right now. Now, we do have softening across the country, but we are seeing something of a variance depending on where you are. And this is where it's actually better to be in the Western United States. Economic history lesson for you all here is that historically, believe it or not, recessions in the United States tend to start in the Northeast and a little bit in the upper Midwest, and then they cascade westward across the country. Contacts right now are generally seeing conditions for business being better in the western part. You know, it really starts in the Midwest, kind of doing okay. The southeastern states, south of the Mid-Atlantic, Virginia's okay, but you get south through that along the Sun Belt from Florida to Texas and then across to Arizona. You know, the architects and the firms that we're talking to are holding their own there. It's not uniform, of course. If you have exposure to the hospitality sector or to the retail, the restaurant sector, for obvious reasons, you're not doing as well as you like. But we do have some regional differences here. And by virtue of us being in Colorado, which had an above average population growth projection, I think we'll still get there. And we do have a state that actually opened up earlier than a lot of the big states back east. You know, we're hopeful that things are going to remain strong here. And in truth, the contacts we have just here in Colorado are doing well. They are reporting there's work to be done. They're still pushing out proposals and they're still winning projects, which is the real key. So that's all very good. Takeaway here, regional differences. Be thankful you're in the Western United States. Real quickly, this is more data coming at Dodge momentum. You can see everything slowing down. We haven't seen the full impact of this yet. Our official prediction is that the second quarter of the year will be very much lost. Nobody knows where the third quarter is going, and that was the fourth quarter of the year very much in jeopardy. My advice to you is that any project opportunity you have come in the door, propose on it, get it out the door, and try to get the cash in the bank as quickly as possible. By the fourth quarter, we may be back into a more normalized period of business activity, and we don't know how we're going to get all the work done with everybody who's been furloughed back and busy as ever. We may be in a more protracted shutdown depending on how the summer goes in terms of infections and whether or not the governments are willing to open back up. So be on your guard. Act like everything is as important as it can be. Every client request that comes through, every proposal request that comes through, it needs to be your top priority. Okay, this is the funny moment that I'd like to have because it raises the question of what do we do now? What do we do when we're in a unforeseen, completely unprepared for pandemic that nobody thought was coming, even as of July or early February of this year? I saw this great article, and you should be able to have this in the chat function, I believe. The link to it, if you want to check it out, it was in archdaily.com earlier this week. It's a very nicely written article, but I want you guys to read it because I don't want anybody to focus on this article when we're in a time of crisis. This piece, which is entitled Architecture Post-COVID-19, the Profession, the Firms, and the Individuals, is about how architecture is going to change. It is about how there are going to be changes to the urban design plan, about how office configurations will change, about how concert hall configurations will change, and how architecture is going to lead the way. This is all very nice, and it may very well be true, but it is also an academic discussion. To talk about business, to talk about what has to happen, is not to talk about what's going to happen over the next several years in a crisis. It is to talk about cash flow. It's to talk about your utilization, your key performance indicators. It's to talk about what clients you actually have, because they're the people that pay your bills, pay your staff, and are ultimately going to lead to bigger, better design when we're on the back end of this. So I put this out somewhat facetiously, and I encourage you all to read this article like this, but this crisis that we're in, while it's unique, will not be the only one of your careers. If we have decades left to work, you can plan on subsequent issues to befall the architecture profession. And every single time that happens, you're going to have to lock down on your cash flow. You're going to have to lock down on the actual business of running it. The best clients that we have in the architecture sphere are the business people who happen to be architects, who know about running their business, who know exactly where their strengths and weaknesses are. And when the crisis hit, knew what they had to do to save the business. And that is what I want you all thinking about. Because the things they teach architects in design school about adjacencies, about how to maximize light and how to make people as effective as possible in their businesses are wonderful things. But the fact of the matter is that all the architects in the world and all the great design that could be done will not happen if you as a profession are unable to run your businesses. You have to be able to do that. And that's what we're trying to help here. So let's talk about it. Business planning in a pandemic. Here is a slide I never ever thought in my career I would have put together, but we're in the middle of it. And here is the takeaway. If you have nothing else from this presentation, I encourage you to remember that cash is always king. Why is cash king? Because it pays your staff, it pays for your space, it keeps you going. It seems obvious, but you would be shocked when I ask architects and engineers too. They get the way of this. I don't want to pin it all on just the architecture profession. It's the whole design world. But when I ask my clients, how are you doing? Tell me about your business. The first thing I start hearing about are projects or proposals or great team leaders, which are all very, very valuable. But I don't hear anything about the solvency of the business. I don't hear anything about how we got great multipliers on this project. I don't care what the project is. I don't hear anything about we got this great set of clients and we got them to pay within 30 days. It's the sort of answer that I never hear. And that needs to be forefront in your thinking here. So if cash is king, what is it king of? It is more important than your contracts, because contracts are good. They're only good if they're with clients that pay you money. It is more important than your projects, because projects are good, but they better be with clients who pay their bills on time. It is more important than backlog, which is absolutely critical and is actually a key performance indicator that you need to monitor in a crisis situation. But the backlog is money that has yet to show up in the door. What we're talking about is money that you have on hand. Proposals are great. This is another key performance indicator. Along with backlog, you need to monitor what's your proposal volume out there. But it's secondary to how much you have in the bank. And this is, of course, and this is me being a little facetious here, your cutting edge marketing. I have to hand it to my architecture clients because everything that they do is marvelous. Brochures, websites, company swag. It looks and feels awesome. I wish we had that sort of capability here at Morrissey Goodale, because architects in many cases are artists. They're passionate about what they do, and they're able to put that passion into a design for everything from a website to a t-shirt to a company letterhead. It's absolutely wonderful. None of that pays the bills. None of that gets you in front of an industrial client who has money to spend when all the flashy clients are out the door, right? That is what I'm most concerned about here. So cash is king over all these things. Your key performance indicators, your backlog, your proposal volume, they're all there. Remember those, but watch your cash balance on a daily basis. So we've hit a crisis. What do we do right now? This is exactly what you do. You wake up one morning, the week before everything was fine. Over the weekend, we now have a pandemic in progress, and they're ordering shutdowns from California to New York. This is what happens. Whatever you thought you were going to do that day goes out the window, and it becomes a hyper-focus on the short term. We would recommend that you structure a 30, 60, and 90-day plan centering around cash flow. You need to focus on whatever billings you are about to make them. If it's the 10th of the month and you don't bill until day 30, get done whatever you need to get done to get those bills out on the 11th of the month. Because what happens is all of our clients in the design world, quite frankly, take a little bit longer to wake up to the fact that something has happened. It's a big battleship, this industry, and doesn't slow down immediately, but it will slow down sooner or later. And what we've started to see in certain sectors is that the clients of our clients, the clients of the architecture and design firms that are paying their bills, have started to slow walk invoices. So your idea when you get in this sort of situation is to get your invoices out the door absolutely as quickly as possible before the clients start to do that, to slow walk, to slow pay, or to say, you know what, I can only pay 50% of this right now. The other thing that we do, and we as a profession are particularly bad at this, is a failure to make collection calls. The calls that we need to make, and that is defined as calling up Mr. Client that you know and love. I love working on your billing, but where's my money? You know, did you get this invoice? And you can ask it more politely than that. I'm being a little harsh here, but it's just confirming that they received it, confirm that your invoice is in process, and ask when it will be paid. In the current environment, we actually had an excuse to make these sort of collection calls because the mail was slow, or people didn't want to go in the office to pick up physical checks. So it gives you an opportunity to actually call up and ask that all your invoices be paid by wire transfer or ACH payment if your clients have the ability to do that, and just skip the mail. The point here is shorten your average collection period. If you do not know what your average collection period is, and you are a principal or you are a client manager of a design firm, you are not doing your job, quite frankly. What you need to figure out is when you send, this is what it is defined, average collection period, and there's a calculation for it, but what it is from the day you send out an invoice, how long does it take to go from accounts receivable in the system, it's gone out the door, to cash back in. The industry standard, which is not good, is anywhere between 60 and 70 days. Many of our clients are 90 days or more. Many of our architecture clients just have problems collecting money because let's face it, it's not fun. Nobody likes to call the people that you like working with and you're designing their great buildings and you know you're spending their money and say, hey, I need my money. I need to get paid. You guys need to get over this as a profession. Business people understand this. They need to call them. You can do it very politely. But the issue that this creates when you don't collect invoices is that it lengthens the amount of money you need to carry your business. And here's why. If it takes you 60 to 75 to 90 days to collect an invoice when it's paid, you have still got, over that period of time, to pay for your staff, to pay for your utilities, to pay for everything that you need to get the business done, right? All your reimbursable expenses. Most architects don't pay their subcontractors, their structural consultants, or their mechanical, electrical, or plumbing consultants until when they get paid. You know, some have a different approach, but you know, you've got to make those payments when you have to based upon your business, but you make it easier on yourself the quicker you get the money in the door. Because if you have to wait 60, 75, 90 days, you have now become an architect / banker. You are extending credit to your clients for possibly a period of months when they don't have to pay you, but your expenses are still running. That is what average collection period is. The best architects that we work with have a handle on this number, and they're able to cycle through it very, very quickly. And they know who their good paying clients are and their slow paying clients. And there are business decisions that you can make that you're going to work for this set of good paying clients and still take on the probably more fun, slow paying clients, and just figure out that's how you run your business. But it doesn't matter if you're a principal of a small firm, you own your own firm, or you have client management responsibilities as a big, larger national or even international firm, you need to know how quickly your clients are paying. Okay. That's the cash is king speech. Let's get into this, and it's all going to revolve around this, which is how to save your business. And what happens? I made the comment that you need to go into a 30, 60, 90-day plan. That revolves around figuring out which clients are paying, which clients are likely not to pay or going to slow play, and aggressively moving things forward. And then at the same time, you have to figure out just where you are as an industry. This is where we are in terms of a lot of the firms that we're talking about. And this is where they were, end of March or so, early April. Once we'd all realized we had to adjust to this work from home environment or work from remote location environment, is monitor the fact that everybody is busy. I mentioned earlier, we had clients that said that their utilization went up in March and April, which is great because they didn't have office distractions, didn't have commuting time. They were able to bill more hours to projects. This is very good. Once you've established your 30, 60, 90-day plan, which is a couple of days, depending on the size of your firm or your business unit, whatever you're in right now, you should be on the phone concurrently with that process, talking to your clients. You start with the big ones and ask them, what are they seeing? Are they still coming through? Are they seeing any issues? Thankfully, many of the contacts that we have in the industry have reported their clients are okay. Either they were considered essential businesses, or that they were able to continue to move forward working from home, and everyone was just adjusting to it because it was a state order, but everybody in their firm was okay. That's very, very good. In the short term, when you have a good backlog, as most firms did. I mean, we talked to firms that did not just have good backlog, they had great backlog, and it was diversified. We had some contacts reporting Q1 2020 was their highest backlog on record. That's all great to see. But where we are right now is that we're burning off that backlog. We're working through, and we've got to replenish it. So, but back to my point here. If you're busy, the staff is working remotely, and your client's okay, don't panic. As silly as it sounds, a lot of people were panicking in March. We'd never seen this sort of order before. We didn't know what the strength of the virus was. There was a lot of concern out there. But we've gotten through things before. We'll get through this one. A lot of firms were in this place. If, on the second point there, you're busy and your staff is working remotely, but your projects are public, you may actually have a different problem here. And this may continue to be the case depending on how shutdowns around the country are lifted. But if you have a payor, and it's not just public sector, it can be private too, but we saw this more with the public sector clients as things came in. If the payer's offices are closed, that could delay payment, speaks to cash flow. That is a problem. You have to understand that since we work in the design and construction industry, there's a lot of inspections that are needed. There's a lot of plan checkers that are needed. We had clients that had plans sitting in for review at county review departments, in this state and others, where the public planners and the plan checkers, the review board all had to go home. And they weren't reviewing plans, and they essentially asked for a break. Thankfully, we saw a lot of local governments, municipal governments try to put those people back to work because they realized that you needed to approve plans to push them forward. But it still creates a slowdown. And if you've been waiting on an approval and all of a sudden it's 2 weeks behind or more, that can impact everything on the project, including billings. If things get further down the list here and your clients are seeing a slowdown and your customers are starting to close, well, now you've got a short-term indication of a long-term problem. The projects are being canceled or delayed, and you've got some clients in highly impacted industries. If you're a small firm, there's probably not a lot you can do with 10 or 20 people in the building and maybe a couple principals to diversify your client base in the very, very short term. You can do what you can. If you're a smaller firm, you have a lot of different experience. Maybe it's multifamily on one side, it's corporate interiors on another, it's industrial even. Whatever you can do to build up that experience, that is a long-term business decision that you can make to help diversify and strengthen your business. But if in the short term, your core industries are impacted, you need to start figuring out how you're going to start to manage your cash flow, how you're going to manage your capital. So again, short-term approach. Most of the time, when we're doing business planning, we're talking about what's going to happen over the next 1 to 3 to 5 years. And to a certain extent, it's kind of laughable, I know, to have a design firm planning 5 years out because you don't know if you're getting a black swan event like COVID crisis, but we do the best we can. In a crisis situation, in a situation of high uncertainty, it becomes blocking and tackling. Your first plan, the 30, 60, 90 days, once you get past the initial crisis, it needs to go to a 6-month model. And you need to exactly know how long you can survive at your current burn rate. That means you have to know your expenses. And that means you have to know how long your clients take to pay. As we've talked about it, here's what you really need to do is you need to identify your client base. I mentioned earlier, you need to be on the phone with your clients to see how they're doing. A lot of the clients in our industry right now are doing okay. They're pushing forward. That's great. Other sectors, not so much. But what you need to do is essentially a risk analysis. Right now, for instance, we have clients working for Marriott or other hospitality providers. That is a rough business model at the moment. Nobody knows when people are going to be well to travel. On the other hand, we've got clients working for hotel chains, and the hotels are using the opportunity when they have largely empty properties to begin some deferred maintenance or renovations. So you can't just make the blanket statement that everybody in hospitality is hurting right now. Could it be true? Yeah. Is it likely true? Yeah. But we've seen instances where that's not the case. There's still work to be done. We have instances where, for instance, a corporate client, an architect with a lot of corporate or commercial clients, if things stopped temporarily, but they've started to get calls from their corporate clients that perhaps they did spaces for 3, 4, 5 years ago, who have now said, I've just decided that I can cut my real estate footprint by 50%. I need you to redesign this office for lower capacity because we can all work remotely now. I mean, those are the opportunities that can come out of this, even in a market that you would expect to be hurting. So know your customers, call them. Now, concurrent with that, you need to figure out what happens if a good paying client becomes a slow paying client. What happens if we only get 50% of our invoices in our 30 to 60 days? What do we have to do then? Where do our costs go? It is and to the extent that you are comfortable with spreadsheets or modeling or any sort of scenario planning, if you're working with a couple partners in a smaller firm, one of you is likely more comfortable than the other, do that. If you're working in a larger firm and you have more resources available to you, work with those in-house resources to figure it out. Now, we have to look at expenses, and this is where things start to get rough. The design business is a people business. Nobody likes to think about furloughs. Nobody likes to think about layoffs. Sometimes things like that have to happen. 2020 is a year like that, where we have to essentially take it on the chin. But you need to look at your expenses. Top line. We don't want to cut our own people. We have to start with other things that happen. And the first thing you do is you figure out what expenses actually have to go out the door this month. Landlords are under a lot of pressure right now, but we know a lot of them are dealing with it. But it's really your business partners and your vendors that you need to look at. It's your structural engineers, it's the other people that need to get stuff done. And we put that in the absolutely have to happen paid. Cash is king, so when you let go of it, you had better be sure that it's important. If something can wait 30 days or you can get something else out of whoever you owe, that's the thing that you need to do. So we got 3 buckets here. The absolutely must be paid, the should be paid, and the cost that would be good. It'd be nice. But we've all got those costs in our business that we can do without. That's not a material impact. That's really what you're looking for. Now, unfortunately, the biggest cost items that we in this profession face have to do with our people. It's not just staff salaries, it's the health insurance, it's our business insurance that goes along. Or in some cases, we have a lot of software subscriptions that if they don't pay, to get our service cruelly shut off. I mean, those are the things that you're looking for here, right? Now, if there are costs that can be cut or suspended, itemize them out, list them out, get everything in there that you can. If there's anything that you can punt or delay on, the obvious one right now is the 401k matching. If there's any extra benefits that a lot of firms, particularly in the last few years when times have been so good, have put a lot of different perks and benefits for their staff in there, those things have to go away. You just understand, and you got to tell your staff that those things will come back when they can, but they got to be put on hold. In this business, thankfully, we're all reasonably intelligent people and pretty well educated, so we can understand all this when it's laid out. But again, as business managers, be you in a small firm or a mid-sized firm or a large firm, these are the sort of things you got to be thinking about. Okay, now let's get to payroll. This one is the tough one. This is the thorny one. And quite frankly, now that we're 2 months into this crisis, this is where firms are starting to fall right now. Because, and if you look at a P&L of a firm or a business unit, the architecture business unit of a larger firm, you're going to see that the largest cost goes to personnel. And we have here 50 to 70%, depending on the benefits that you're paying and what's going on. That is a lot of money. And we can reduce office perks and we can reduce or delay certain expenses. But when you get right down to it, the biggest expense that any professional design firm has is the people there. It's the brains that make it work. So what do you do? If you have a group of partners, you have to get together and discuss this, of course. If you're in a larger firm operating a unit, the decision may just be handed down to you in terms of what happens. But this is what you're looking at. Reduce work weeks if demand drop, if utilization starts to fall. So remember the key performance indicators that are critical right now. You have the cash, you need to pay attention to your utilization. How billable are people? You need to pay attention to your backlog. What is the future work going? And you have to watch not only those indicators, but the interplay between the two. Because if you have a situation where utilization is very consistent, but your backlog is dropping, obviously your people are working hard, they're working away, but they're burning through all the work that you've got, and you don't know what you're going to be doing next month or the month after that. Conversely, if you've got utilization is consistently high and backlog is staying the same, you've got to look at that to figure out whether or not your projects were actually put on hold. And this is for those of you who come from larger firms. If you have backlog that's fairly consistent, but people are still working away, then you have to look at how you calculate your backlog. If you've got $100,000 in fees out there and it just keeps staying out there, it may have been that the project was delayed. It may be that the project's getting pushed out and you're not billing against it. So your backlog, while it looks okay, and your utilization, while it seems okay, may actually indicate that there's not work being done and you're burning it off and you're not replacing it, or something is up there. So you got to maintain not only these individual things of cash flow, utilization, backlog, but you have to watch the interplay between them all. The other piece of that is just your proposal volume, of course, which we discussed earlier. But those are your critical performance indicators. Back to what we're talking about in terms of saving the business. Nobody likes this. Nobody likes paying less. But again, we're educated, thoughtful, hardworking people in this profession. And it's one of the great things about working with architects that I enjoy. Is your client base is typically very, very good, and they're fun to work with, and they're good people. They will understand, given a crisis situation, that there are wage reductions, right? They will understand that we're all in this together, and to keep the firm together and to keep our team together, we got to agree to this. As a manager, you need to understand that vacation and paid time off still represents a cash outflow. When you have people that quit either because they're asked to leave or because they choose to leave on their own, if they have a week or 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of vacation sitting on the books, you have to pay them out for that time, and that hits your cash. That hits your cash flow. That hurts. And this is particularly problematic, I think, for architects because so many people in this industry just love what they do. We see it all the time. There's huge vacation balances that are outstanding on the books of these firms because nobody takes their time off, or they just want to work on the project a little bit more. They get on the road to go take a vacation or take a driving trip somewhere, and they end up working for half the day when they get to the hotel because they want to make sure the design is just right. Now, that stuff happens here. What it does is it leads to a buildup of paid time off or vacation time that is a liability for the company going forward. So you need to recognize where that is. In the early parts of the crisis, many firms were recommending that their staff just take PTO. If they were uncomfortable coming in or if they were uncomfortable with the work restrictions. And that was a good thing because not only to give people a chance to get out of the office, but it actually reduced the company's liability. So as a business owner and a business manager, you need to be thinking about these sort of things. What can help staff, but also what can help the mothership, what can help the company. And that was one idea. Our other point here on surveying the staff, just talk to people, be communicative. We tend to see this more as a problem on the engineering side of the house, where we have firm owners or leaders or principals who may not talk quite as much, or communicate quite as much as we'd like to the rest of their staff. Architects are usually pretty good about that and being honest about what they're facing. But ultimately, the firm leaders, you do want to work with the people. You hired them for a reason. You brought them in to get a job done. You do have some camaraderie that you need to maintain. I have my line down there about only one captain can steer the ship, and that is very true. But to the extent that you talk to people, let them know what's going on and exactly what you're thinking, to the extent that you know it, or the extent that you have a plan, is all very, very good. And we should not let this up. Okay, and then we get into this, which is really the phase of this crisis where we're at right now. Now, how long will it last? How much money do I have coming in May? How much do we have coming in June, realistically speaking? How much do we have coming in even in July? And if you're looking at this, remember the 30, 60, 90-day plan that evolves into a 6-month plan. If you're looking at this, you should have a reasonable expectation of what money is actually coming in. If you are unable to control the outcome of a dollar coming in, I would encourage you to write down your expected cash inflows to be conservative. For instance, if you're waiting on a design to be finished, but you have a partner architecture firm that is out of your control and you're waiting on their piece of it, I don't know if you can recognize that revenue when you think you can. It's not in your control. If, on the other hand, you're just billing on a time to complete or milestone basis, or you can hit your milestones and push out bills, that's exactly what you want to do. That's what you want to focus on. You can control that. That's realistic revenue coming in, provided your client is not falling to pieces right now. And many of them aren't. Many of them are doing okay. But these are the sort of hard questions that you have to ask. That's the top line of what's coming in. Let's talk about a little bit more about what costs can be delayed, right? And I've got some options up there for you. uh, rent is the big one and lease payments are the big one. I mean, they are your primary suppliers. Your landlords will be upset if payments are not made. But in these, as well as some other vendors, recognize that payment terms can often be stretched. And this is where I think architects in the business may or may not see themselves as real business people. Thankfully, in this industry, we have this approach that a contract is a contract. And if you promise to pay someone, your landlord or some vendor, you're going to pay them because you're a good person, you're an ethical business person, and you're going to live up to that commitment. That is fantastic. Another reason why I love working for this industry. But understand that the people you're working with, who you owe money to, they're business people too. And in a crisis like this, they're going through it as well. We're not the only people who are trying to figure out what our cash burn rate is and how long we can stay in business before bad things start to happen. So if you have an opportunity where payment terms can be stretched, do that. I mean, we have local banks here that we've talked to in Colorado where they have term loans out and they've agreed just to put a 90-day hold on payments, and the part that is missed just gets appended on or capitalized into the overall loan amount. So, they just stretch out payments. The banks have agreed that they've got good partners. They want to help them. And so they've agreed not to get paid for some period of time, 1, 2, or 3 months. And we've heard of that happening out there. These are, we're working with business people, and in a business crisis, you can renegotiate contracts, which is really the point that I want to get to here. You do have promises that you've made. You do want to keep those as business people. But my comment there on you have to look for ways to extend the runway. Don't wait until the situation is really bad to go hat in hand to a lender or to another business partner or a vendor and say, I can't pay you this month. Can you give me 30 or 60 days? Don't do it then. It's okay to go into crisis mode, even if you got plenty of cash on hand. Negotiate a deferral. Take advantage of the terms that the bank is offering somebody else that you may not need, and then choose not to use it if your business is okay. When the crisis hits, you need to look at everything because nobody knows how long it's going to last. And if we're in a situation here where we have months going on months, where we can't pay ourselves the way we want, or we can't pay our people, you sock it away early on. And that is the point here. I bring this up and I really want to hammer this point home because crisis mode thinking in a business context is unfortunately not something that, not just designers, engineers, architects tend to think of. It's not something anybody thinks of. I mean, I have an MBA. They never taught how to respond to a pandemic, any course that I took. But this is the sort of stuff you have to do. It is crisis management and short-term thinking, cash flow management. Okay, so we're getting to the end here, and we can move to any questions that we've got. But what are our takeaways here? This is what I want you all to remember. Whether you're a principal or a business owner now, or you think you may be at some point later in your career, or you're part of a larger engineering firm larger architecture firm that could really use some additional business savvy in its management ranks, this is what I want you to go for. First of all, cash is king. I know it's cliched. I've said it a lot, but hoard the cash to the extent that you need to. And it begins with the average collection period that I talked about. It begins with getting invoices in. Expenses, we can see them all on paper and know what they are, but the hidden expense, the thing that most people don't think about is that when you float an invoice, you put out a receivable out there and you don't collect it for 90 or more days, you are in a lending industry. You have just given your client a free, pick a number, $5,000, $10,000 loan for a period of time, which is very nice of you, but it does not help your own business. Focus on that. 2, crisis management. What absolutely has to be paid? We talked about what those items were, and then that leads directly into 3, which is payment terms can be negotiated here, particularly when we're in the middle of a crisis that nobody anticipated and that nobody alive has had to deal with before. It's okay to go back to the people you've made promises to or you've made commitments to and say, you know what, this isn't working right now. We need to talk. Don't be afraid of having those hard conversations. This is the businesses that have that are led by people that can have those conversations are the ones that are going to survive the crisis and may probably come out stronger because of what they've been through. And of course, point 4 there, as I said, you got to call your clients, monitor them, and pay vicious attention to your key business metrics. A lot of firms I've talked to, if they only submit their timesheets monthly, they've gone to weekly or middle period submittal of timesheets so they can get up to the minute, up to the week, whatever the case may be, is reports on project utilization, where they're going. You should be running weekly cash flow reports. You have to know what invoices are outstanding if you're part of a smaller firm, and you have to be making weekly calls on those if they're not coming in. That is your basic blocking and tackling of business management. And the good news is that this can be done whether it's you're a very small firm, mid-sized firm, or you're a manager of a business unit in a larger firm. But this is what you should be taking care of here. This is what you should be watching. Okay, folks, here's my contact information. I've been talking away here for just about 45 minutes, so we're right where I wanted to be, and open up the floor here for anything that comes in. A bit of a tough love message, I think, but one that I very much wanted to get to all of you. I mentioned that I just really enjoy working with architects as a profession, and the more that I can get you to be thinking about business people so we can be working together for a long, long time, the better off we'll all be. But Mike, I'll open up the floor here. Did we get any particular questions through or anything we can answer?
Not yet, but I've got some.
Okay, fantastic.
We'll let folks fire away and get those ready. Great content, by the way. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Practical and implementable right away. If they're not already doing so, they know what to do now. I just want to start with the question, how weird is this? I mean, are there precedents? I mean, it's not like some of the previous ones we've seen where maybe it was people over-evaluated tech stocks, or housing crisis, or lending was not where it should be, or there's too much speculation. It's more like an induced coma.
It is. It's a great analogy. And the answer is no. We haven't seen anything like this before, which is both good and bad. If we'd seen something like it before, we'd have an analog for how to deal with it. The scientific community looks at what happened in 1918 in the Spanish flu. But the fact of the matter is, it is a different economy right now. It's a different world. In the late 90s, early 2000s, we had the tech wreck that was then hurt further by the terrorist attacks of 9/11. That just put fear of all different sorts into everybody. That was rough. But then we recovered and we pushed on, and then we got to the Great Recession, which was a slow-moving financial crisis that took a year and a half to take down every sector of the economy in one way or another. And then we get this pandemic. And the real thing about it is, we went from effectively full employment in the United States, and particularly in Colorado, where we're doing very, very well. We went from full employment by the middle of February to millions of people unemployed, and official 14 or 15% unemployment. That figure's getting worse in the month of May, just a few months later. So it's new, it's different. Everyone remember this and tell your grandkids.
Yeah, well, maybe we want to forget it as soon as possible. I know the last one in 2008 was tough. I mean, not only was it tough sector-wide, but it took a long time. So we were looking at our peak to peak, from when we had the highest number of members and income to when the lowest, and then back up again. And it was a 5-year process. That's very much a U-shaped recovery, and people talking about, hope for a V-shaped recovery. Of course, the crystal balls are all broken, but is it more like you referenced this earlier, it's not another Great Recession type event. It'll be something different.
Yeah, the best I have heard on what this recovery will look like whenever it gets here is actually a square root figure. You can imagine what the square root figure of math looks like, where there's a sharp dip and then it kind of comes up, and then it's a longer push up like that. I think that's probably it. I think we probably loosen up. We get back to some level of a normalized economy, and then it's going to be a longer road. The airline industry, if any of you are working for aviation architects, the project out at DIA right now, they're trying to make as much progress on because traffic is down 90% year over year. That'll be there, but that's an existing project. That is not a new project. If you're in that sector, we could be years off, 3 to 4 years off before things start to normalize again. Mike, I got one question here. I think it's a good one. Any sense of the average backlog among participants right now? And whoever wrote this, you're in an enviable position because you added, we're good through June 2021. I've got a couple of responses to that. First of all, most of the architectural clients we have and we're speaking with, the contacts we have, they feel like they're pretty good through 2020. They've got work to do. They may have to furlough some staff here or there. They may have some softness in certain sectors, but 2020 they're feeling okay about. We get into 2021, things start to get rocky. That's a 6 to 12 month sort of look that you have. 12 might be on the outside. If you got backlog through June of 2021, that's fantastic. I have one piece of advice for you. Make sure those are paying clients through June of 2021. It may be on the books here, but I've got one architecture client who had a huge, huge project back east. It was going to be great, marquee, the sort of thing that everybody goes to school wishing they'd work on, and that's on an indefinite hold right now. And the reason it's on an indefinite hold, by the way, is because the corporate bond market has stopped functioning. The market for floating money for getting big projects is not working right now. You can't float commercial paper to fund major capital projects. So you may have it booked, but if your client can't raise the money to do a massive design or even a moderate sized design and construction project, you're going to wait. It's going to be backlogged, but maybe it's June 2022. But thank you for answering that. 6 to 12 months is what we're hearing on the best end.
And I copied that question over to the chat in case other firms and participants in the call today want to put in there what they're seeing as well.
Yep. Another question here on just which sector is the most reliable. Also a great question. And it goes back to Mike, your question. Have we ever seen anything like this? In a normal, quote unquote, recession or falling economy, I would say that anything to do with the public sector is best because you have long-term budgeting. You have capital projects that were awarded a year ago that may take another year to work through the system. It'll get you through the crisis. The problem that we've got right now is that there is no tax revenue, or at least significant tax revenue, coming into cities and counties, municipalities. I've got a client in Florida who's still pushing proposals out for police stations and a 911 call center and like life safety stuff, right? Architecture client, but that's a little bit more the exception as opposed to the rule right now. Right now, municipalities, the local governments, the public sector, they're looking in somewhat shocked disbelief at how little tax revenue they have coming in. So in most crisis situations, most recessions, go with the public side. Right now, the only people spending a lot of money is the federal government. The people I have, the clients I have that are working for aspects of the federal government are the ones that still have work to do. And they're feeling okay about things. We're going to have an election in November, which is going to throw a wrench into everything. Who knows where the spending is going to go in 2021, but currently that's it. I will say in the private sector, if you're in the right healthcare sector, like life sciences labs, you've got work to do, right? And sometimes it's just emergency planning. Like we've got a client that all of a sudden started designing stand-up field hospitals in parking lots. They invented that as a business line in essentially a week. That is crisis response at its best, right? But put that on the website, say, we can do that for you. That's a very, very flexible firm, though. We don't see a lot like that, but that's an idea for it. It's a good question.
The related point on that is, government has not shied away from an appetite for stimulus. And really only the federal government has done that because the state and local revenues, as you talked about, those receipts are just crashing to the floor. But the difference is, and so if you think about when Obama came into office, the stimulus was mostly built around infrastructure, and this one is tied a lot to getting money into individuals' hands. Nobody's seriously talked about infrastructure yet.
Yeah, and it's something that our friends in the engineering side of the house have been hoping for at least 6 years, that we're going to get a massive infrastructure spending bill, which, by the way, to all you architects out there, when we have a local measure asking for more money for transportation, for anything, vote for it. Because when we build infrastructure, it germinates everything that you guys do, whether it's industrial or healthcare or multifamily residential, whatever the case may be, retail, even hospitality, all that's going to get built after that transportation infrastructure. So please vote for it. It's as political as I'm going to get right now. Yeah. The other thing to pay attention to, again, something to tell your grandkids someday, is that we have a catastrophically steep curve in unemployment. Tens of millions of people just in the last few months have filed for unemployment benefits. That's never happened before. And yet we have this bizarre situation where the stock market, once we got through March and early April, really isn't doing that bad. It hasn't recovered, but it's still hanging on. And the answer is, Why? How could that possibly be the case when we've got millions of people sitting around just streaming Netflix all day, right? And the answer is we have $3 trillion of federal stimulus money being spent. And, that's to prop up the economy and to some extent the world, believe it or not. It will filter out there as Americans continue to spend money. But we have a tremendous policy response here. You can argue about whether it's misguided, what happens next, but the federal government is the agency is the entity that's spending money right now. So the extent that you can get around that or position yourself for it, that'll help you get through 2020.
Yeah. We've got a question here on BEST grants and how BEST grants or bonds are affected.
Yeah, it's a good question here. Short term, let me back up here. My comment about the bond market earlier. Let me just make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. Let's say a massive corporation, GE, even airlines or something like that, would needs a lot of money, and they don't want to go necessarily to the full public markets and use their equity. They want to float debt. They want to take on corporate debt to do it. The bond underwriters therefore create a corporate bond. They float it in the commercial paper market. Entity gets all the money to do whatever they want, invest in the business, right? In a normal course of business, that's what happens. The nice things about bonds is once they're floated, whoever they're based on gets the money, right? You can go do what you want to do.
Oops, we got Nick frozen there. I'll chime in while that's getting worked out on the BEST grants. That's
those bonds. The pricing of those bonds. Are we back?
We're back. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the challenge. Well, while I was frozen there, I said the most brilliant answer that you'll ever hear, and I forgot it immediately. But I will. I'll regurgitate as best I can. It's the bond. It's the bond market. It's the holders of the bonds that are really at risk. The people who have issued the bonds, as long as they can continue paying for them, whatever it is, whether it's public sector, private sector, whatever the case may be, they've already got the money to do whatever they need with. It's the bond holders. It's the owners of those that are really facing the crisis right now. And how that plays out, over time is still anybody's guess. Right now, we haven't seen any issue with the bond market, BEST grants or otherwise, aside from what I told you about new bond issuances going to market. That's where the problem is.
Yeah. What we're hearing from the legislature is that, and the Office of the State Architect, is that the state projects, any money that they had set aside in the budget planning process for the legislature for those, they're pulling those back, using them for COVID-19 response. The school ones they have not touched yet, but the legislature has until the end of June, and they're going to come back here in a couple of weeks to put that budget together. So as of right now, they're still on track, but that could change, of course, at any moment. But we'll know for sure by the end of June whether the BEST grants are going to go forward as planned.
We're all fingers crossed.
Yeah. I really appreciated your just breaking it down into manageable chunks of what people can do, the 30-day plan, 60-day, the 90 plan, even the 6 months. What would be your counsel to people on how much of that should be communicated to colleagues in firms who might be wondering, what is the plan for this business to make it through this?
Yeah, it's a good point. If you're in a little bit of a larger firm, smaller firms, particularly in this industry, smaller companies in general, they tend to start acting more like families, right? I mean, I've got clients who say that to me all the time. These people are like my family. I got to take care of them. You have a different firm culture than if you're in a 500 to 1,000 person AE firm, right? You're going to be hearing different things. So you have to approach it based on what you've got. The owners of the firm, the principals of the firm need to communicate to the staff that, times are rough. Right? You can't sit there and you can't blow smoke at them and say, oh, no, we're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. We got backlog out till next year. Now, you might. Maybe it'll be okay. But then it's going to be even worse message when things do start to go wrong. So you have to be very honest in what you're doing. I don't think in smaller firms or even in larger firms, you need to go so far as sharing profit and loss statements with them. I don't think you need to get down to that level of detail. I think you can tell them, we've got issues in terms of these costs, we're working on them. This is what we're trying to do. But I think the most important thing to do, because this is what everybody wants, right? In a crisis situation, what can I do to help? People don't want to sit around and think that there's nothing to do. I mean, why did we have a run on toilet paper in March? Because people were panicked. Like, oh, I'm going to be sitting at home for a month. Like, I got to do something. That was the reason. It was all psychology. You got to be able to give people something to do. That's what you need to do as a manager. Here's what you can do. Advance that billing. Call that client. Get on the phone with somebody you haven't talked to in 3 years and tell me what they're saying. Give them that sort of stuff to do in the short term, really, and get your answers back there. I got a couple questions here, and I know we're bumping up against the end of the time, so let me get to them really quickly here. One, we had a question on a shutdown of construction, and the question is, do we extend the time of the project that will take or to be in substantial completion? I vote yes, and it depends on how your contracts are written. I mean, you can claim it was an act of God, force majeure, like you couldn't get anything done here. Our experience so far is that people are working with each other. They understand that, we've never had the government tell 320 million people to go home, which is essentially what we had, right, in the month of March and April. So it's an unusual event. I would recommend that if you do have some clients or projects, and this speaks to the analysis that I talked about halfway through my presentation there, in your risk assessment, you got to figure out, okay, we've stabilized the business, or we know what cash we think is coming in. Where are our projects exposed? Which is the biggest problem out there? Do we have just a jerk of a client with this great project that is going to hold us to the letter of the contract? And do we need to go back and renegotiate that or talk to them about it? It's a case-by-case basis very much.
Yeah, I think
that was a question.
Was in contractual terms too. So.
It is, yeah. And we used to say that, by the way, as a confession, my former life before getting into this business, I was in real estate development. I'm sorry. But it gave me a real perspective on things. And in real estate development, when all else fails, RTC, read the contract. And if your contract does have a provision for it, that's what's going to save you here, or that's what you got to negotiate.
To just add one thought, reminds me of your comment about the bills that should be paid, and about talking about like real estate, for example. So you can ask for a stretch and not use it. So I think it's akin to this comment here in the question. If it's in your contract that you're going to classify it as additional services, if it gets delayed, you'll get paid because that's in the contract, but you don't necessarily have to use it. If your client's in trouble and they're asking you for a little bit of grace, you don't have to follow the letter of the contract necessarily if you want to keep a good, positive business relationship with that client.
Yeah, good point. Last couple questions here. Great one. Thoughts and advice for employees and mid-career architects. Yes, point one, write down, or I hope take notes, whatever, of everything that I said, because if you're mid-career, you're going to experience this again. If you're early career, we're going to have another crisis. We're going to have another contraction of some sort. And all of this is going to be relevant, and you can still use it. Doesn't matter if it's 5, 10, however many years from now. If you are not in control of financial decision-making, there are still things that you can do. And here's a good one, and that's listen to all your clients, have conversations with all your contacts, everybody you talk to in the architecture world, or your clients. So if you work for an industrial developer, if you work for a multifamily builder or a REIT, talk to the people you know over there, and then distill the information and pass it up to your decision makers, pass it up to your principals. Because what's happening in every business owner's mind right now is there's too much information. There's been too much news to digest, good or bad. You don't know what to think. We've had so much misinformation about COVID and how it can be contained, right? From all different sources. There's just too much to process. To the extent that you can distill, if you're a employee or a mid-level career person, and pass on to your principals or your managing partners, whoever you talk to, what you're seeing and hearing, that gives them a real source of information. That gives, that firm across town, that client, they're doing this, they're seeing that. That either correlates with what I'm hearing or it doesn't. It's another perspective. That's exactly what you can do in the here and now. You help them out that way because there's too much going on, right? Last question here. What would be the ideal strategy to use the PPP loan? Okay. I'm not under contract with any of you people, so let me tell you what I've been hearing. I have got clients that have said, Nick, my business is up 10% year over year compared to this time last year. I'm taking this money and I'm going to go hire everybody who's been furloughed or laid off from my competitors, and I'm going to come out of this thing stronger than when I went into it. That is one strategy. I have another client who's in the Midwest who said, Nick, my particular state is not going to do well because of budget issues that they already had, and now it's worse. I'm going to take this money and acquire a firm in Texas where things are going to go well, or Florida, or a high growth state. Pick it well. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Have good luck getting that money forgiven. But that's what they're using it for. The purpose of the PP loan, of course, the PPP loan was to keep everybody employed. If you're a business owner or manager, I'd suggest you make sure you burn it all for that purpose. If you're below the $2 million threshold, latest guidance as of last Friday is that you're not going to be audited by the SBA, or they'll assume that it was needed. So you can be a relatively large architecture firm and still be under that $2 million limit. So you have flexibility there. If you're above that, if your firm took more than that, your banker should have helped you with this, but you need to keep a clean audit trail there. So what to do with it? Keep all the people employed. I do have clients or contacts that I've talked to who said, you know what, Nick, the COVID crisis was a good reason for me to let go of some people who I should have let go a long time ago, or last year, or something like that. That happened. But for the purposes of where to use that money, you keep the people employed. But I do have clients that are being more aggressive with it, and they're a bit more risk taking for the industry, but they intend to come out well.
Well, that's all the questions, and it's a action-packed hour and change. So we really appreciate all the information that you were able to share and the insight that you gave to our participants today. Thank you if you're on the call for being with us. And just, round of applause for Nick and Morrissey Goodale.
I can hear it all. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate what you do to help our members stay on the right track financially and to get through the other side of this situation. That's what it's all about, is make sure that there are firms and employers who are still there when we are working at full pace again. So appreciate all the information that helps us do that. To make sure you receive your HSW credit for today's, or your CE credit for today's session, there's the RSVP function for the event. If you want to do a belt and suspenders approach, you can also put your name and member number in the chat function. That way we'll get on either way. We'll be able to record your learning unit. And then tomorrow we've got an interesting panel lined up, similar format or similar topic, except this time we're hearing from members of firms who have navigated recessions in the past, and here's some of their lessons learned from previous events, and if any of them apply to what we're experiencing now, and how we can get through that. So we hope you'll join us for that. And then next week we are pivoting back to some of the more fundamental things about designing as an architect, and we've got a great session on building thermal envelopes and thermal separation into your structural supports, and that's by the Studio NYL, who's got some projects around the world that are really cool to learn from. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody, for being on the call today, and we'll see you back again soon in the virtual world. Take care.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks so much, everybody.